Hey guys, Drifter here. Today I'm reviewing PUBG on PlayStation 4. I just loaded in the game right now and I wanted to show off the extra fancy customization options you get if you get the special edition of the game, which is Uncharted Nathan Drake's desert outfit, which looks surprisingly good and fitting for this game. And you also get Ellie's backpack from The Last of Us, which also looks quite good. Now I'm not going to play as either of these. I prefer to play as a naked man. That's how I like playing this game. And I wanted to start off this review by reviewing the controls. Unfortunately, we only have controller button presets. We get no custom bindings on keys. You have standard invert X and Y axis, and really nice to see that you can manually adjust the dead zones and vibration to your liking. There's a whole list of input sensitivities for movement, for vehicles, aim acceleration like on PC, over the shoulder, and different sensitivities for every single scope. So that was really considerate and really good for console players. I was happy to see that. General settings aren't particularly interesting. There is a Colorblind Mode, which I chose not to enable so that you guys get normal color gameplay here. And you can do custom crosshairs, which is kind of an unusual feature for consoles. Also very nice to see. After that, the audio and graphics settings were very simple. So now, on to the gameplay. One of the things I wanted to start off with is that the controls for this game are not very well explained before you get into the game. In my first game here, I literally didn't know how to exit my plane, even though it says press circle to eject. It's a tap circle, not hold circle. If you press it for too long, it won't do it. I had to do a quick tap to eject, so that was kind of frustrating. But we're going to structure this review with more positive and factual stuff first, and then my more negative, critical opinions, of which there are quite a few coming later. So to start off with, one of the good things is that if you get PUBG on PlayStation 4, you get the full game of PUBG. You get every map, every mode, all the items, all the skins, the crates, everything that PC and Xbox gets, you also get with a handful of like a few exclusive items that each system has to have for whatever reason. But you can play in Russia, in the desert, in Vietnam, in the snow coming up, and PlayStation 4 even has a public test server, which doubled my download time because it was downloading them both at the same time. But you can try all the new guns and all the new stuff on the public test server on PlayStation 4 consoles, same as you can on PC. So that's really good. I'm glad to see that it launched the full game on PlayStation 4 and not just like one or two maps. Another good thing is that PUBG PS4 also has all of the same possible movement controls, inputs, etc. as you would have on PC. There's nothing that you can do on PC controlling your character or your weapons or movement wise that you can't do on console. That applies to the Xbox One X as well. So there aren't any corners cut on the gameplay. It's the full PUBG experience. After playing the game, I'm not gonna deny it was really rough at first because I'm used to playing PUBG on PC, you know, running 1440p, high frame rate, high graphics, all that sort of stuff. So coming back and playing PUBG on console land was rough. I've also been playing a lot of COD, which is a fast-paced shooter. But after a while, after a couple of games, I found it to be a surprisingly playable experience. I personally was expecting the pure pain of the Xbox One launch, the Picasso buildings, the 20 FPS, the infinite bugs and crashes and weird lag and controls, and that really wasn't present here. I think that Bluehole, or the PUBG Corporation, which is owned by Bluehole, learned a lot from their mistakes from the Xbox One launch, and we have a much smoother launch here. And for all of the jokes that PUBG gets about being a dead game, which it's not, by the way, it still has like 800k people playing every single day, being broken or, you know, a bad game or whatever, or killed by Fortnite, this was a decent experience. This wasn't one that I would meme on too hard or say was too bad. Now, PC is definitely better, but yeah, it was very playable here. Some other little things I noticed is that the audio on this game is way better than Blackout. I could actually hear footsteps and sound whore people like a reasonable person, but it did sound different than PC PUBG for some reason. I couldn't put my finger on exactly what sounded different, but it was a little different. And oddly, I didn't lag on PlayStation 4, like no lag at all, which was very surprising to me. I think I got lucky in that aspect more than that's going to be your normal experience for the game. But now let's get into some negatives of PUBG on PlayStation 4. And you're at 5 minutes into this video, you see the gameplay, you already know that this is not a graphically beautiful game. PUBG PS4 is not going to be winning any awards for best graphics anytime soon. To be fair, it's not the Xbox One Picasso buildings at launch, but it's a really long way from PC in terms of looks. The official sheets and specs that were released show the game running at 1080p on PlayStation 4, at least PlayStation 4 Pro, but I swear it looks upscaled. When I'm playing the game, it does not look like a crisp 1080p. I suspect it's an upscaled 1080p, or they have absolutely no anti-aliasing whatsoever on consoles, because I see a lot of jagged edges when I run around, and this makes it a little bit harder to spot enemies, especially if they're sitting still, because they're not as distinct against the background. Speaking of things that are still versus moving, I spot them easier when they're moving, of course, but it's a little rough because the frame rate is capped at 30 FPS for stability reasons. This is not a 60 FPS game and has no intentions of going 60 FPS anytime in the near future. This is brutal for me because every game I play is 60 FPS or higher, 120, 144, whatever. I thought that I could adapt to it, and over some time I was getting more used to the frame rate, but then for some strange reason the frame rate would dip or chug or skip frames or lag a little bit. This was mostly when I was running through cities or turning too fast. There was just too much load on my PlayStation 4 to properly handle everything. So I would say that frame rate is up to 30, and it ran at 30 most of the time, but I did have it dip down into the 20s on occasion. Buildings, trees, and most objects have a lower draw distance than they do on PC, as you would expect. When skydiving out of my airplane over to some sort of new object, I noticed that unlike PC, the buildings don't load when I look down at the ground. They're just they look like aerial maps. They're little geographic maps of the ground. So I kind of needed to know where I was going before I already jumped out. The buildings didn't really load until I was about halfway down. And I can also see it struggling sometimes to keep up with all the objects in the map. Sometimes I see them Picasso or pop in and out in the distance and struggled. This was probably the weakest part of the graphics. The draw distance was a big turnoff for me. Moving along away from graphics, let's talk about controls. Controls are really hard for this game. I think they're the same as the Xbox One X, but they're difficult. They're not as intuitive as they are on PC, but that's the nature of having a PC game where you have an entire keyboard full of buttons and 6 buttons on your mouse and different types of inputs. You have to translate that to a controller, which has much less total buttons. There was a training mode that I could have played that was supposed to get me up to speed on this, but I skipped it. Personally, I really hate training modes. Those are just painful and boring for me, so I skip them as often as I can. That's a problem that VR games have. They make you do like a 30-minute tutorial to remind you to look behind you, but that's a totally different story. Thankfully, there's a lot of in-game tips that pop up on the screen that remind you of the controls and what to do, and I think those are essential because it's really overwhelming. There are a lot of different inputs to do, and different controls do different stuff depending on what mode you're in. If you're in third person, if you're aiming down sights, if you're peeking over shoulder, depending on what you're doing, if you're free looking, or there's a lot of different sort of modes you kind of swap in and out of, and the console buttons change accordingly. The one thing that they're not particularly clear about is whether these buttons that you're doing need to be tapped or held, and tap in this game is very quick. You can't do a normal press. You have to do like a millisecond tap to do tap to pick up, tap to equip, tap to do a lot of different things like that. So that needs a little bit more clarity, but the tooltips do help. And after some time, I was getting less awkward at moving. I was getting more used to it. It wasn't that bad, but it was definitely harder than PC. One thought that I have is I don't know why PUBG, especially on console, isn't like it is on mobile. When you pick up a weapon, it should already be in fully automatic mode. It could already come reloaded. That's not the biggest step. Or more importantly, if you see an attachment on the ground like a red dot sight, and you're holding your gun, there should be a button that says attach red dot sight, not get in your inventory and then go through and attach it the slow and tedious way. When it came to aiming, I found the default look inflection curves and the lack of sticky aim felt very bad compared to Call of Duty. It wasn't very natural feeling aiming in this game. It's very hard to track targets that are moving. With no sticky aim, it's very easy to overswipe. And maybe changing my dead zones would help a little bit, but I think the reality is that just not every game is Call of Duty. Call of Duty, for all of its flaws, is probably the gold standard for shooters on console, along with Battlefield. And one of the reasons why is they put a lot of work into mastering natural movement and aiming on console controls, which is almost always difficult. Bluehole and PUBG don't have as much experience with this. They may have even tried to copy COD or some other game, and they didn't get it quite right. It is kind of struggle bussy. Some thoughts on the players that you're going to run into is that I was surprised to see roughly the same level of aggression as PC players on PlayStation 4. The PlayStation 4 crowd was slightly more conservative, but in general, people on PlayStation were not afraid to drive around or to come out and hunt and snipe and play like big boys. I mean, PUBG is a very campy game, so there will be people sitting in dark corners and stuff like that, but it wasn't nearly as campy as I was expecting. Only about half of the players were sound whoring in this game, so situational awareness is not the same for console as it is on PC, and that applies to me too as well. Sometimes I get overconfident and I'm not paying attention and I stamp around and people just shoot me in the back. Lots of players I did notice seem to be struggling with the controls. I watched them doing slow peeks to kind of over the shoulder instead of aim down sights aim, and a couple of other little things there. Speaking of over the shoulder versus aim down sights, I've noticed that over the shoulder was more effective than aiming down sights, and I think the over the shoulder aim has some sort of really strong hidden auto aim, or maybe I was just getting really lucky with my headshots with it. I expect over the next couple of weeks, it's going to play at about the same level as Xbox One X does. Once players learn the controls and the maps a little bit and they get a little more familiar with it, it is going to be a PUBG experience. So at the end of the day, the question you want to ask me is, should I buy this game? Well, if you want more milsim or realism in your battle royale and you like a patient game, a slow-paced game, then I think you'd enjoy PUBG on PlayStation 4. Each game here, if you go all the way, is about 40 minutes long, and there's a lot of dead time and a lot of running and a lot of prep time, and you die really, really quick sometimes, kind of like milsim. If you're already on PlayStation 4 and you're very happy with Call of Duty Blackout, or you're happy with Fortnite, I don't think you're going to like this game. The pace and the way that PUBG plays is so much more slower and more tactical, it's slower and more tactical than either of those games. If you like the speed and flow of those games, this one is going to feel painfully slow. So guys, that is all for my review. I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope that you learned something useful. If you did, don't forget to like, favorite, and subscribe. Drifter out.